In 1967, it's reasonable to say that most people who were concerned to try and create a political alternative to Lyndon Johnson because of the war in Vietnam didn't much care who the presidential candidate was, as long as it was somebody who had a chance of winning.
Early in 1968, voters, shocked by a massive enemy offensive in Vietnam, the Tet Offensive, were courted by presidential challenger Eugene McCarthy.
I've been saying I intended to stop the war, and I've been, I think, explaining how, by proceeding to negotiate a coalition government, or at least to be prepared to accept a coalition government. But both the President and Mr. Nixon are talking about ending the war, but they're not saying when or how or at what cost, and I think that's the issue in the New Hampshire primary.
Senator McCarthy's strong showing in New Hampshire encouraged another candidate, Senator Robert Kennedy, brother of the late president. His campaign got an early lift from President Johnson's surprise announcement that he would not run for re-election.
But I need your help. I need your assistance. So over the period of the next 30 days, will you help me? Will you tell your friends? Will you whisper it or will you yell it?
War critics Kennedy and McCarthy dominated the Democratic primaries. Under FBI surveillance and troubled by rising violence in the anti-war and civil rights movements, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke in Memphis and foreshadowed his own death. King's assassination the next day rocked the nation and sparked riots in more than 100 cities. Black power militancy increased. Unlike most political leaders, Kennedy had sympathized with King's opposition to the war.
Senator Kennedy, would you comment on the death of Dr. King?
I wrote out some words. He dedicated himself to justice and love between his fellow human beings. He gave his life for that principle, and I think it's up to those of us who are here, his fellow citizens and public officials, those of us in government, to carry out that dream, to try to end the divisions that exist so deeply within our country and remove the stain of bloodshed from our land.
Opposed to both Kennedy and McCarthy, Johnson picked Vice President Hubert Humphrey as his heir apparent.
We've had some very severe blows lately, and we've got to try to bind up these wounds. And if this means, quite frankly, if it means that I don't have the time for campaigning like an ordinary candidate, that's the way it'll have to be.
Over the next 2 months, Kennedy and McCarthy continued their rivalry in the Democratic primaries. The contest reached a climax in California. Kennedy won. His assassin was waiting.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
McCarthy's campaign workers were watching reports of Kennedy's victory celebration.
They don't know who's been
As we get more definite details, we'll bring them to you.
If you do not leave the room, we cannot get medical aid to the senator. Now, would you please stand and cause confusion?
What? Kennedy has been shot.
To help get medical aid to the senator, please leave the room.
Let me,
Somebody should stop Robert Kennedy. They're
this
trying
is Drinkwater.
Please, we need you immediately.
You were there and you saw what happened. Yes, I did. What? I'm sorry, I can't make any comments.
To many, Kennedy's assassination 2 months after King's seemed confirmation that the country was on the verge of chaos. Then came Chicago. Torn by strikes and braced for violence, Mayor Daley's city welcomed the divided delegates to the 1968 Democratic Convention. Relations between the police and the press corps were tense. Vice President Humphrey, choice of the party regulars, was assured of the nomination before he arrived.
Good to see you. Great.
But Humphrey and the Johnson administration were still targets of McCarthy's muted attacks.
I think the case is rather clear as to what's wrong about our involvement in Vietnam. And I think the case is rather clear as to what we ought to be doing about our problems here at home. It calls for some quiet and some restraint, a kind of backing off for a minute to look at America and to consider what we ought to be doing. And the nation has done that, and with your help and the help of others in these next 3 days, I believe that the Democratic Convention will do the same here in Chicago. Thank you very much.
Others had a different purpose.
Our position is that whoever the candidates are, and whatever the platforms, that we must stay in the streets and stay in active resistance, or else there will be no peace, either in the ghettos or in Vietnam.
We don't know.
Do you have a permit to march on the impetus?
No.
But you're going to march anyway?
Are you expecting trouble? We expect to march.
What does
We
this...
expect trouble all the time.
Thousands of highly visible protesters descended upon Chicago. Militants, pacifists, and hippies, with 500 undercover agents among them.
You are on our property which you are defacing. If you do not leave, you will be subject to arrest.
Some demonstrators were nonviolent. Others deliberately provoked the police.
These people are revolutionaries bent on the destruction of the government of the United States of America. They're a pitiful handful. They have almost no support, but by golly, they get the cooperation of the news media. They're built into something really big. Gentlemen, the hardcore leadership of this group are communist.
I told my partner, I says, grab your club and jump out swinging before they tip us, because we'd sooner fight than roast. So we jumped out. Well, I should say I jumped out first, and he stayed in the wagon and called for help. When we got out, I grabbed one. I hit another one down. And then somebody grabbed me from the rear and flung me into the crowd, and these dirty hippie son of a so-and-sos, they called me a mother hunchin' so-and-so and a white fascist. They said, you're getting some of your own medicine. And then some citizen, I don't know who he was, but I wish I could find out, he stopped his car and jumped out with a little pinch bar. And he started helping us. Otherwise, I think they'd have either killed me or crippled me more than what I am.
Amid the violence, talk of peace.